welcome to Wildflower Weekly with Ashley Adair. I'm Ashley, and I work as an Ag and Natural Resources educator in Montgomery County, Indiana. We're back in McCormick Woods once again this week for week 7 of Wildflower Weekly. You may have noticed that it's quite a bit shadier in this woods this week. That means we're getting toward the end of spring ephemeral season. Spring ephemeral season usually lasts until June in Indiana, so we'll continue to watch the species we've been looking for the last few weeks, but we're going to shift gears a little bit and start looking at some of our other woodland perennial species and talking about those. So if you're ready, please join me for another walk on Wildflower Weekly. Let's go! The young trees leafing out on either side of the trail here are sugar maples. Sugar maples are prolific and will start shading out our spring ephemeral species more quickly than other tree species. That being said, larger trees throughout the woods are rapidly leafing out as well. Soon enough, these trees will create enough shade to plunge the woods into a green shadow until fall. For those of you joining us for the first time, this video series has been discussing spring ephemeral wildflowers. A spring ephemeral is a woodland plant that completes its life cycle in a short period of time, usually between March and June in Indiana. These plants provide many benefits to woodland animals at this time of year, serving as food and nectar sources for insects and larger animals alike. We are nearing the end of spring ephemeral season in Indiana, as evidenced by warmer temperatures, at least most of the time, and shadier conditions in the woods. Let's set the scene. I'm walking at McCormick Woods, a Purdue-managed property near Purdue's campus. The woods was walked on Wednesday, May 6th. The weather was 60 degrees Fahrenheit and mostly cloudy. This woods is open to the public for hiking and mountain biking and is partially managed by a local mountain biking organization. McCormick Woods is seen here from the south entrance, adjacent to a golf cart path on the Ackerman-Allen Golf Course. There's so many leaves in the mid and upper canopy of the woods that we're getting mostly dappled sunlight on the forest floor this week. Although the weather on average looked pretty nice this week, we are preparing for a potentially historic overnight freeze Friday evening into Saturday morning. Many tender perennials and agricultural crops suffer greatly when temperatures dip down to 28 for as little as an hour or two. Although spring ephemerals like spring beauty will fare well during weather events like this, there are other woodland perennials and trees whose leaves will be burnt. Some plants that are better suited to warmer temperatures may even be killed in this cold event. Just as a reminder, I'm hiking in northwest Tippecanoe County. If you're just as few as 15 miles north or south of me, you could be experiencing different conditions and different stages of plant growth and bloom at this time of year. It's also worth noting that not every spring ephemeral species is found in this woodland. Some species that are common or semi-common in other woods, like bishop's cap, Virginia bluebells, and hepatica, are so far not found in McCormick Woods. If you have a species that you're wondering about, please feel free to reach out to me for identification. Contact information can be found in the description of this video. Here's how it works. Each slide has information organized in a particular way. Here is the photo, here is the scientific name, and here is the common name. Below the common name, you'll find some interesting facts about the plant, how it's pollinated, its role in the ecosystem, and more. We've added an update in the bottom right of some of our slides to show you what's happening with a flower that we saw in weeks past. We're starting off with an update on mayapple, which finally started blooming this week. The flowers are visited by bees, particularly bumblebees. The fruits of these blooms are a favorite of box turtles, so it'll be exciting to check these out later in the season once the fruits have set to see if we might find any box turtles among the mayapple colony. This explains why many of the mayapple plants we're seeing haven't been topped off by deer, unlike the trillium plants that we saw last week. Remember that flowers are only produced by mature mayapple plants, the ones that have 2 leaves, like shown here. I thought about renaming Wildflower Weekly to Wild Vine Weekly this week because of all the new vines I found in the woods. Virginia creeper is a familiar Midwest vine that is a member of the grape family. This familiar creeping vine is pretty ubiquitous in the Midwest and can be found in many habitats, including forests, fence rows, urban areas, and old railroads. This cousin of the grape plant attracts many of the same pests that can be found on cultivated grapevines. Next up is Toxicodendron radicans, the poison ivy plant. This plant is a member of the cashew family. Poison ivy leaves are somewhat variable across individuals and locations. Sometimes the leaves will have indented borders, looking somewhat mitten-shaped like the leaflet on the right side in the photo, but other times leaves will have completely smooth edges. Remember, leaves of 3 don't touch me, but leaves of 5 let it thrive, thinking back to Virginia creeper on the last slide. Or you can think of it this way. You can shake hands with Virginia creeper because it has 5 leaves like we have 5 fingers. Getting back to poison ivy, this plant is either a vine that can climb up to 60 feet or a shrub that gets up to about 3 feet tall. It just kind of depends on where it's growing. This plant is known to bring down big trees. Some of the vines can get very large. The foliage of the poison ivy plant produces a chemical called urushiol, which is a skin irritant. Most animals in the woods appear to be immune. The berries are an important food source for many of our native songbirds, and they are unaffected by this chemical. Another new plant this week, and also a vine, is Menispermum canadense, moonseed. This is a vining dioecious plant. This means that individual plants either produce only male or only female flowers. This plant produces a fruit that bears a striking resemblance to wild grape. However, the fruit is toxic to humans. Even if you were to take a bite of this plant, it would taste so bad that you wouldn't want to eat any more. However, birds such as cedar waxwings, robins, brown thrashers, wild turkeys, and towhees will consume the fruit. This plant is called moonseed because the seeds inside the fruit are shaped like little crescent moons. The leaf of this plant could potentially be mistaken for wild grape. One way to distinguish this plant from wild grape is to look for the presence or absence of tendrils. Moonseed has no tendrils, whereas wild grape will have a 2-pronged tendril that is found on the stems opposite the leaves. We have a wildlife alert this week. Odocoileus virginianus, the white-tailed deer. This species feeds on many woodland plants, including trillium, Solomon seal, bellwort, and poison ivy. As long as the foliage isn't explicitly toxic, deer will probably nibble on it, and they appear to be immune to poison ivy, so eating those leaves doesn't bother them at all. This is a popular wild game animal. However, deer populations have become very dense due to a lack of natural predators. Although deer are native, dense populations can mean some native plant communities are at risk in certain areas. For example, deer have fed on the majority of drooping trillium plants I've observed in McCormick Woods. Another plant that they prefer is bellwort, and in some areas, bellwort is actually a threatened species. Moving on to an update on bellwort. Remember this plant that has the perfoliate leaves and the drooping yellow flower? It has begun to set seed. The seed pods are attractive. They're heavy and they droop over in front of the leaves, looking a bit like a pendant. The seeds are distributed by ants through that process called myrmecockery that we've discussed several times over the past few weeks. Have another brief update on Geranium maculatum, the wild geranium. This showy spring ephemeral is attractive to bees, butterflies, skippers, and flies. Chipmunks are known to forage for the seeds, and the flower is an attractive pinkish-purple color. Geraniums are blooming prolifically in McCormick Woods this week. Just like Spring Beauty was blooming gangbusters several weeks ago, wild geranium seems to have taken its place. Another new species this week, Smelacina racemosa, the false Solomon seal. This look-alike to Solomon seal is also a cousin to hairy Solomon seal. This look-alike to hairy Solomon seal is also a cousin to hairy Solomon seal. Instead of having flowers that form beneath the leaves, this plant has flowers that form at the top of the stem. The flowers of this plant are attractive to bees, flies, and beetles. The fruits are eaten and the seeds are dispersed by animals like the ruffed grouse and the white-footed mouse. The flowers are still budding. When they open, they will be white. We'll make sure to check back for these next week. A brief update on Persicaria virginiana, the jump seed plant. This cousin to the Pennsylvania smartweed and lady's thumb tends to thrive in the woods, whereas, remember, this plant is a cousin to Pennsylvania smartweed and lady's thumb. However, those two plants tend to thrive in much sunnier environments than jump seed. This plant is named for the seed's ability to jump from the plant when the ripened seed pod is touched. Some improved varieties are used in home landscapes. Jump seed plants with distinctive watermarks, like we discussed last week, are popping up in more of the wetter areas of McCormick Woods. I have an exciting update on a cousin of the currant plant. This is wild gooseberry. It's in the genus Ribes. There are several species of wild gooseberry found in the Midwest, but we're not sure exactly which one this one will be until we see fruit. The stems of this plant are very spiny, so be careful if you handle it. Notice that the leaves are very similar to the cultivated currant plant. We have a fern update. Homalosaurus pycnocarpus, the narrow-leaved glade fern, started unfurling this week. This is a relatively large fern that grows 2 to 3 feet tall. This fern has fronds that are dimorphic. That means that there are fertile fronds and sterile fronds. The fertile fronds are upright and will produce spores. The sterile fronds, on the other hand, which form a clump around the fertile fronds, are less upright but will grow to a similar length. This fern forms colonies via rhizomes. Another interesting plant this week is Smilax acerata, the upright carrion flower. This plant is so named for its very smelly flower. It's attractive to several kinds of flies, beetles, and bees. This plant is unique because a variety of bird species and mammals will feed on the fruits and spread the seeds. Some of these animals include wood ducks, thrushes, wild turkey, ruffed grouse, squirrels, foxes, and raccoons. And lo and behold, the white-tailed deer will browse on the foliage. You may have noticed over the last several weeks of this Wildflower Weekly series that white-tailed deer are known to feed on lots and lots of these plants, whether it's occasional browsing or full-on defoliation. Unfortunately, our update for blue cohosh this week is a disappointing one. We narrowly missed the bloom time for the blue cohosh. The plant is fully leafed out, so we won't expect to see any flowers. Instead, we'll watch for fruit formation through the summer. I've provided a Wikimedia Commons image so that you can see what the flowers would have looked like if we would have gotten to them in time. Let's switch gears to the invasive species update. Checking out Alliaria petiolata, garlic mustard has started to set seed in some areas. Notice that the seed pods resemble that of other mustard family plants. Remember toothwort? Its seed pods are similar to this as well. It's especially important to prevent garlic mustard from reaching this stage. This plant was pulled after it was found. Remember that garlic mustard is a biennial. The leaves that are shown in this image are the basal leaves, the very first leaves to appear after a garlic mustard seed germinates in its first year. Next year, these plants will form flower stalks like the ones that we've been pulling up this season. Remember to bring a trash bag along when you pull out these plants and to pack them out with you. Please use the resources shown here to learn more about invasive species featured this week and in past weeks. As always, stay safe and practice physical distancing, but make sure to get outside when you can. Follow us at Purdue Extension Montgomery County on Facebook. And as always, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.